Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the disappearance of a young boy called Jacob Wetterling, and his case would actually go unsolved for a massive 27 years before his family, absolutely devastated, finally found out what happened to him fully. It's just such a sad case. This case can't talk. This case was suggested. I seriously can't talk. This case was suggested by Donald, so thank you for that. I appreciate any suggestions you guys have, and of course if you do have any more, please do let me know. Jacob Erin Wetterling was born on the 17th of February in 1978 to parents Patty and Jerry in Minnesota. He was one of 4 children. Now, he had an older sister who was called Amy. Then you had Jacob. He had a younger brother who was a year younger than him called Trevor. And then there was their younger sister, Carmen. And he just had such a lovely childhood. This case happened in the 80s, right? So you may think, nowadays you wouldn't really let things like that happen as often. But in the 80s, you had a bicycle, you were a little kid, you just go off on your bike and just explore the world. People didn't really see predators of the world, monsters of the world, as actual people. They were only films and things like that at the time. It was very rarely thought of back in them days. So they would be allowed to, him and Trevor would be allowed to get on the bikes and just roam around freely, travel the great outdoors, and again, it was just the norm back then. Jacob had plans, for his future. He was 11 years old at this point in time, and he really wanted to become a veterinarian. He wanted to help animals and things that were innocent and that could not help themselves. So that's what he wanted to do in life, which is just such a great and admirable career, to want to help animals. That was his dream. But sadly, he would never get to fulfill that dream, because on the 22nd of October in 1989, the family had a lovely day. They were enjoying a nice 3-day weekend. Jacob, like I said, he was 11. His brother Trevor was 10 at the time. He had his friend round who was called Aaron Larson. He was also 11 years old. They were gonna stay the night, watch some films, things like that. They were massive sports fans as well. After having a fun-filled day, they decided that they wanted to go and get this match. I can't remember which match it was. It was some sort of sports match that had just been released, and they figured that it would be at this convenience store called Tom Thumb's. So their plan was to go and get it, go and hire it, and get some snacks and stuff, and then bring it back. However, it was getting late, and his parents were actually out at this dinner party. So what he did is he rang Patty, because he knew better than to just leave the house without asking. He wanted to get permission off his parents. He didn't just want to go. So he rings Patty, and Patty didn't really want him to go. It was 9 o'clock at that point. It was dark outside. She didn't want him to go, so she said no. And also, he was looking after they were all looking after the, Carmen. So she didn't want to leave Carmen alone and let the boys go out on their own in the dark. Fair enough. But he didn't really want to accept that for an answer. Yes, okay, he wanted permission off his parents. I don't think he would have gone if he didn't get it. But he was going to do like a lot of kids do. If the mum says no, what do? You go and ask your dad. So he did. He asked his dad. And his dad, once more, was not very keen on the idea, but all of his concerns, he had figured out a plan for him, and he had answers to. So he didn't want him travelling around at night time, because where they lived was a very remote area, and it was a lot of farmland and things. And in between this short journey from that to the store, I believe it was about 20 minutes on a bike. It wasn't that far away. And they did it all the time. It wasn't like they didn't do it all the time. They did. So they knew the route. It was a few cornfields, a few driveways, just sort of country roads in between. But he was worried that it was dark. So they said that they were going to wear high-vis jackets, and that they were going to take a flashlight so that they would be seen on their bicycles. So that's that covered. Then you've got the issue of his little sister. Well, he'd actually asked the teenage girl next door if she wouldn't mind coming round and watching Carmen for a little while they nipped to the shop. She agreed, so he had that covered as well. With all that in mind, Jerry agreed. He didn't really see that much of a problem with it. They were going to be seen at night. The worst thing that he was thinking about was, looking after the little girl, his little girl, which was covered, and then not being seen at night time by cars. so that no accidents would happen. Also got that covered with the reflectives and the flashlight. So he just said yeah. The Wetterling's brothers set off, and so did Aaron. They all go out on their bike. They start riding towards the convenience store. Little did anyone know that on the way there, a predator had caught sight of them. And he pulled his car into a driveway and lay in wait for the boys. Like I said, nobody knew that. So the boys go in the store. They tried to hire the sports match thing, I can't remember what it was, that they wanted to hire, but it had gone. So they decided to rent The Naked Gun instead, which was from the year 1998 on VHS. And then they got their sweets and snacks, got on their bikes and started heading back. One of the boys said, I don't know which one it was, said that they actually heard this rustling sound, which did unnerve them. And then as they're heading down the road, they're not super far from the house at that point, I believe. And then they see somebody stood in the road, and it is a man. This man is dressed all in black, has a mask on, and also has a gun. Now at the time, the gun wasn't loaded, but none of the boys would have ever even remotely known that. Someone's pointing a gun at you, you're thinking it's loaded, and you are terrified. Of course you're going to be. So what he does is he orders the boys to get rid of their bikes in a ditch, which they do. He has them at gunpoint, you know, you're going to have to do what he's saying. And then he told them all to lie face down in the asphalt. He then went ahead and asked them how old they were. Trevor replied first. He told the man that he was 10 years old. He tells Trevor to get up and tells him to run into the woods and do not look back or he will be shot. Next, the man ordered the other two up to turn around and look at him, and he inspects their faces. He asks Aaron how old he is and he replies 11, and he tells him the same. He tells him to turn around, run into those woods and don't look back or he'll shoot him. So he does. He legs it into those woods, following Trevor.
He grabbed Jacob and then he told me to run as fast as I could into the woods or else he'd shoot.
And he does actually look back, and by the time he looks back, the man and Jacob have both gone. I believe about 100 yards into the woods, you know, the boys do catch up with each other and they're looking around. Jacob is nowhere to be seen. He hasn't followed them in the woods. Again, when he looked around before, he saw that they'd gone. He had no idea what happened to Jacob, and probably that this man had took him, but wasn't certain. So they both leg it home and go and tell a neighbour what had happened. Nobody knew at that point that that would be the last time that they would see Jacob alive again. Of course, the neighbours straight away called his parents that, you know, 3 boys had gone out on bikes and only 2 had come back. And then they were telling these stories of this man who had picked him up and basically gone with him and held a gun to him. Like, what on earth is going on? So they ring Jerry first, I believe, telling him that obviously Jacob hadn't come home with the others, and then the story that was going on. And then, of course, once they rang both parents, they rang the police. Officers got there within literally 6 minutes of the call, and I believe they initially didn't believe the boys. Like, they thought it was a pretty far-fetched story. Like, they assumed that either Jacob had run away or that they had both been playing around with a gun, it had gone off and accidentally, you know, they came up with the story because they didn't want to get in trouble kind of thing, but that Jacob had just sort of run away. They looked anyway, they searched the area where he was last seen, but there was no sign of him anywhere. I believe, probably as more time went on, you know, they believed the story. I don't actually know the ins and outs of that section of it, but they did extensive searches for Jacob. They got his name out there in the public. They wanted the public's help because obviously a child is missing, and they searched the area that he was missing from and didn't find him. So you need people to be on your side in the public, because if they see him and they know that he is missing, they can call the police and tell them straight away. But they searched for months and they just found nothing. Patty then went and did this interview with Minnesota's Pioneer Press. This was 2 months after Jacob actually went missing. And at that point, the FBI and the National Guard had joined the search for him. Residents and the public came together. They were all posting posters, you know what I mean, of Jacob being missing. There was this reward out for him. There was 1,000 flyers printed to raise awareness of him being missing. And the police did receive thousands of tips. Donations were coming in left, right and centre. They were going towards helping look for him, and also a reward that would be for Jacob too. It was very efficient how they searched and things as well. They had search parties out hither and everywhere, and it was very coordinated because they knew exactly where people were searching and the area that they'd searched at the time. You know, they were very organised in that sense. The police obviously had all these tips and they interviewed all these people. They interviewed a man who was 26 years old at the time, and he was called Danny Heinrich. This was on the 16th of December in 1989. They figured that maybe he had something to do with it. And there was also 10 months before Jacob went missing, there was another report of a similar sort of incident where a boy had been sort of taken, violated, and then he was let go. So there were similarities in the case in that sense. And they were questioning him about both, but I believe they didn't have any evidence to tie him to anything. Nothing like that. So eventually they did have to let Danny go. Not before they actually took his DNA though. And there were more attacks. There were like all these different attacks between teenage boys between 86, 87. You know, after that there was some more attacks that happened, but nobody was ever arrested or charged in those. And then the years passed by, decades passed, and there was nothing. Nobody had a clue about Jacob, nobody knew where he'd gone. His case was getting colder as more time passed because there was just no information coming in. And that was until a woman called Joy Baker got involved in the case. So when Jacob actually went missing, she was 22. And she kind of got personally invested in the case after watching how devastated his family was that he was missing. She saw them on the news, and then she decided that in 2010 she would write this blog about Jacob. And she began from that investigating the case herself. It didn't take her long to come across that very similar case that I mentioned before. It was of a young boy called Jared Shirel. I apologise if I said that name wrong. I can't pronounce it. I don't mean any offence by my terrible pronunciations. So he was 12 years old, and this occurred on the 13th of January in 1989, where, like I said, he was abducted and then violated by a masked man, and then later was released. Now, this guy apparently kept his sort of pants and underwear, and he actually left a fibre on Jared, which would eventually, I guess, be his undoing, thank goodness. So these cases happened within 10 miles of each other and were very similar, so Joy figured that they were probably linked. She went on alongside Jared, I believe, on TV on the CNN's Hunt in 2014. This kind of ramped up the cases and gave it more oomph behind it, and the police started really looking into it. Of course, at this point, DNA technology has improved so much. They had taken Danny's DNA all those years ago, and so they began looking into everything again, testing DNA, things like that. Danny was 53 at that point, and they actually got a match from his DNA to one of the victims. I'm not sure whether it was Jared or not, or whether it was one of the other boys, but he had done this numerous times. They named him as a suspect, and they were able to get a warrant for his arrest. Now, the issue here was that the statute of limitations had already passed by for Jared, sadly, so even though they had the DNA match, they couldn't arrest him on that. So they get a warrant for his home, hoping that they find something else. And wow, they did. They found indecent images of minors there, lots of them, and so they arrest him for having those. It wasn't for murder or assault on a minor or anything like that, but at least they had him in custody, and then they could see what was what. That was in October of 2015. Facing 25 federal charges and knowing going to prison with what he was at least accused of doing wouldn't have boded well for him, because, you know, prisoners don't like people like that at all. So they don't do very well there, let's just say that. And he decided to take a plea deal. Basically, he would not get charged for any of that or for Jacob's assault and murder if he just told them what happened, basically, and pled guilty. Not pled guilty, but if he confessed to Jacob's murder, he wouldn't be tried for it, and therefore it would be better for him in jail, kind of thing. And obviously they put that to the Wetterling's family, and they did agree, because they just wanted to find out finally what happened to Jacob and bring him back home. He proved this on the 31st of August 2016 by taking them to Jacob's remains, where he had buried him. So they managed to get some bones, some clothing. It was close to a field near Painesville, which was about 30 miles away from his home, from Jacob's home. And the site was also not too far from where Danny was living in 1989. On the 3rd of September, through dental records, the remains were confirmed to be those of Jacob Wetterling. So he finally told people what had happened. Basically, like I said, he had seen the boys as they were going to the store. He laid in wait, whatever, for them to start heading back. And when they did, he, as I've said previously, he told them to strut their bikes. He did the whole run or I'll shoot you thing. Then when it came to Jacob, he handcuffed him behind his back, his arms behind his back, and then he put him in his car. He was driving him around for a while. The only thing that Jacob asked was what he did wrong, which is absolutely devastating, because he'd done nothing wrong whatsoever, and this monster did not answer him. He just carried on driving. He was listening to a police scanner the entire time, so that he could avoid the areas that were being searched. So that's how he got away with it. That's how he knew where not to be, pretty much. So he starts heading towards, like, his home area. He took him into the woods, I believe, or something like that. Took him out of sight. Violated him, and then Jacob said that he was cold, so he got dressed again, told Jacob to do the same. He put him in the car, and he was gonna let him out at some point, you know, presuming that the boy would be able to make his way home. He didn't initially intend to murder Jacob, which is just so much more heartbreaking, because Jacob may have gotten home safely if he didn't see a police patrol car with its lights on, which spooked him. And then he decided that he was going to kill Jacob. So what he did is he pulls Jacob out of the car, out of sight, tells him to turn around. He loads the gun with 2 bullets, tries to shoot him. I believe the gun wouldn't go off the first time. He shot him again. Well, again, this would have been the first shot because it didn't go off the first time. So he pulls the trigger again. Shoots Jacob, but Jacob was still stood there. He then does it one more time, shoots him again, and this is when Jacob falls to the floor and he's deceased. He then left his body there, went back home to get a shovel, came back, figured that the shovel wouldn't be good enough to dig a big enough hole. So he goes to some sort of construction site close by, jumps on machinery that he knows how to work, and digs this massive hole. Well, not massive hole, but digs this hole for Jacob's body. He buries Jacob's body, but then it wasn't actually the last time that he saw his body, because he comes back a year later to check on the site to make sure that, you know, you can't see him. And you actually could. Part of his red jacket and his high vis that he was wearing that night was sticking out of the ground. His body had started, I don't know, whether the dirt on top had been sort of washed away, or whether his body was rising to the top. Who actually knows which is which, but you could see parts of his body. So he decided that he was going to move him. He gathers everything that he can, his bones, things like his clothes, and he just takes him across the road a bit further in the field that he would be eventually found in, and digs another hole and buries him once. And that was what he did. He got away with it for so long. Jacob's parents were absolutely devastated, but they really wanted to know, after nearly 30 years, what had happened to their son. No matter how hard it was to hear, and boy was it really hard to hear. Patty actually said that it was incredibly painful to know of her son's last days, his last hours, his last minutes, and that for them, Jacob was alive until they actually found his body, which just broke my heart even more. We spent 27 years thinking that he was still out there, and he wasn't. His body was, his remains were, but he wasn't alive, sadly. It's so heartbreaking. But finally, they were allowed to bring him home. So Danny was charged for 20 years for the indecent images that he had in his home. And of course, the plea bargain meant that he wouldn't be charged for Jacob's death, which is frustrating, but I can completely understand why the family agreed to that. And obviously, you know, they found out what happened to the kid. That is all they wanted. It's also been said that it's likely that he will never get out because of the brutality of his crime. So I hope so. I hope that he never sees the light of day ever again. He was transferred to a federal prison in Massachusetts in 2017, where he's going to serve out his 20 years, which is hopefully the rest of his life, because he should never get out. Jacob's legacy lives on. It lives on far beyond the boy that went out on a bike to the shop and never came home. And his name will live on in infamy more than just what happened to him. The federal Jacob Wetterling Act was passed in 1994, and it was due to his parents and things. And it was basically the foundations of the Sex Offenders Act. The Sex Offenders Registry, sorry. And that each state would maintain one of those. And that was sort of the baseline for it. Obviously, it is, you know, grown and spiraled and changed since then, but that is where it came from. His parents also went on to form the Jacob Wetterling's Resource Centre. It's an advocacy group for children's safety that aims basically to educate the public about all things like that. There is also a crossing of the Mississippi River near St. Cloud. It is called the Bridge of Hope, and it is named in Jacob's honour. I mean, this case is heartbreaking. It took 27 years. It took such a long time to finally find out what happened to him, but I'm so glad that they did, because they were just living their lives thinking that he was out there somewhere, and that possibly one day he would just walk in that door, and he had been in the ground all that time because that vicious, evil man had murdered him. You know what I mean? It's just so heartbreaking. He had such big plans for what he wanted to be, and it was just stolen away by a friggin' monster. Like I said, so much has come from this case, you know. Obviously, you wish that it didn't happen in the first place, but in his legacy, a lot of good has come from it, and his parents have really fought for that, which is amazing. But yeah, that's the end of the case. If you guys have enjoyed this video, give me a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for similar content. Anyway, that's all I have today on the case of Jacob Wetterling. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye!
My whole name is Jacob Irvin Wetterling. My favorite food is steak. My favorite color is blue. My best friend is Aaron Larson, collecting football cards. I don't have a favorite book, and my newest fantasy escape